perhaps the last real moment of Commonwealth communion in that old-fashioned way.
15,000 natives celebrate the coronation with a giant sing-sing. Here, indeed, is a demonstration, too, of the widespread affection of all her peoples. People who are unified by the crown and the beautiful young woman who wears it.
From this moment, Elizabeth became Australia's head of state. Symbolically, at least. Half a century earlier, the framers of Australia's constitution left the sovereign's powers generally vague. And, such as they were, a Governor-General would exercise them in the name of the distant British monarch.
In the office of Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia.
Yet, over the next 60 years, successive Australian Prime Ministers would find that Queen Elizabeth kept herself well briefed on the affairs of her Australian realm.
Morning, ma'am. Good to see you. Rest well?
Yes, thank you very much.
That's good.
And not working by the cockatoos.
The Queen's been a very conscientious Queen. There's no doubt about that. In all the discussions I had with her as Prime Minister, she showed a real, not only a real interest in, but a real knowledge of the country and a concern and a contemporary appreciation of issues that were important.
Your Majesty, on behalf of the Government and people of Australia, it's my primary purpose to congratulate you on the 40th anniversary of your accession to the throne. I actually have a high regard for the Queen. She's probably one of the most travelled figures ever. She's a world figure. She's a reasonable conversationalist and has a bit of fun in her as well. And so for a life which has a certain monotony and drumbeat to it, she likes the occasions that jump a little out of the ordinary.
I was fortunate enough to have one of the warmer relationships with Her Majesty. Friendly, close.
The truth is I liked her and she liked me.
We saw quite a bit of each other, a shared sense of humour.
You know, we'd crack jokes.
And because I was Prime Minister for a long time, we had a lot of laughs together.
When I say crack jokes, they're kind of respectful ones, but...
Next time you come, you must stay at least for a month.
Well, if I can spare the time, it would be very nice.
Elizabeth's relationship with Australia has seen the transformation of the old British Empire into the modern Commonwealth of Nations. Under her reign, it's grown to 54 member states, representing every region, religion and race on Earth.
We had rather opposite views to the President Nyerere.
Leaders agree it's one of her greatest achievements.
I'm sure she retains a strongly idealistic view of the Commonwealth as being a multiracial force for good in the world community.
She's been doing it all these years, and she's watched leaders come and go. She plays the Commonwealth meeting a bit like a pianist plays the keys, you know, professionally and well.
Prime Minister of Canada and Mrs. Trudeau.
Most of her subjects, of course, would never meet her in the flesh. But back in the 1950s, the Queen was a vibrant presence in their lives. Australians saw her image everywhere.
The Women's Weekly enjoyed a fantastic relationship with the royal family. It had the highest readership of any magazine in Australia. It went into 1 in 4 homes, and so this was a fantastic way to let Australians know what was happening with the royals.
They were like the Kennedys of the early 50s, a glamorous couple, and a breaking out of the austerity of the war years, the very potent material embodiment of hope for the future.
In those days, girls actually did believe in princes, and we all thought there was a prince waiting for us somewhere. It's only later we found out that this was definitely not true.
A child growing up in the 1950s could dress Princess Elizabeth paper dolls, build coronation coaches, and read stories about Elizabeth's childhood. For kids, a fairy tale fantasy. For adults, a glamorous celebrity. I learned about the Queen, obviously, from the day I first started school, because the headmaster of the school insisted that every Monday morning we assembled on the tennis court, the flag was hoisted, and then I love God and my country.
I honour my king.
I salute the Queen.
I salute the flag.
And cheerfully obey my parents
And my teachers and the law.
From the suburbs to the bush, Australian children were drilled in the same routine. Morning parade and God Save the Queen.
I spent a fair bit of my childhood in a native camp. Every morning at school, there was a school parade and we all had to wear a school uniform. We'd line up in lines and then over the loudspeaker there would be the national anthem, which at that time was God Save Our Gracious Queen. I don't think I could ever sing the national anthem. I think I kind of pretended to mime. I could do... And then the rest of it was, I would go, just to look like I was saying something, but it was very hard to get away with that in a line of 15 kids.
There was certainly a charming picture of a young queen in the headmaster's office. I sadly had to visit the headmaster very often and bend over and be caned by him. I do remember that picture. I remember eyeballing. That was my first eye contact with the Queen, was when I was being caned by the headmaster.
Early 1950s Australia was another country.
We were quite a happy bunch of people.
Money was tight, housing short. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of fun. Britain had just exploded its first atomic bomb at Maralinga in the South Australian outback.
The British Empire was a very big thing.
White Australia feared Reds under its beds and the Yellow Peril to its north, but not much else.
It's a time when you never locked your house.
And to protect us, we looked to America, rather than Britain, as our ally in the region.
It was a safe place, you knew your neighbours.
But many Australians still regarded Britain as home.
We knew all the kings and queens of England. We certainly didn't know who the first Prime Minister of Australia was.
This was the Rip Van Winkle years of Australia.
It was a pretty straight and narrow time.
The years of the Great Slumber.
But, I mean, by the world standards, having regard to the terrible deprivations and destruction and murder, mass murder in Europe, we were a lucky country.
It is the 3rd of February, 1954. A city and a continent are waiting, for a queen is coming.
Everyone, that's all the conversation was about. The Queen is coming.
Oh, just so thrilled the Queen's coming to see us. They waited everywhere. They were sleeping in the streets.
So, a new dress? My goodness, to see the Queen?
And here they are at last, amongst us, moving in triumphal progress through each city in its turn.
It was the first time a reigning monarch had ever toured Australia. Every Australian who's old enough can remember what they did when the Queen passed through their town.
We got a half day off school, and I think any one of us who was at school thought that was a pretty good thing.
We went to Erskineville railway station in Sydney and caught the buses to the showground.
Our school was chosen to be in a mass sort of display at the Melbourne Cricket Ground.
It was a full Scouts jamboree.
And we all wear flags. We've been given flags.
What a crowd! Many of them have waited there for more than 20 hours for this brief glimpse of their queen and her husband.
And we stood there. And we stood there. And we stood there. We just bloody stood there.
Suddenly a roar went up. All the kids, because out of nowhere came this Land Rover.
And the Queen was on the far side with the hand metronomically waving. And the Duke was on the near side looking out at us, probably saying, God, who are these deadbeats?
And there was these thousands of kids all dressed in white. So as she paraded round the outer part of the cricket ground, she looked like she was some kind of goddess on a cloud of white, floating around just like this. So we all yelled and screamed.
back to bursting point. Conditions perfect.
Miraculously, the breeze came up and the sea came up, and by the time Her Majesty arrived, the waves were perfect for a carnival. She'd have held her own with any of the beach girls on the beach, and there were some really good girls on the beach in those days.
In the bush, Elizabeth encountered Australia's Indigenous peoples for the first time.
When the Queen visited, important Aboriginal people made an effort to go, because she's the ritual head of the white people.
Though, like all Australians, Aboriginal people were regarded as British subjects, they weren't yet treated as full citizens of Australia. Yet many Indigenous Australians accorded the young Queen an almost totemic status.
She's the ceremonial head, the religious head. And being the Queen as she is, and some kind of mystical figure, then she would understand, they think, the ceremonies that they perform for her. She would automatically understand their import.
Whyalla, and the real thing, as it was done in the Stone Age.
White Australians thought it was amusing and funny, but I don't think that's how the Queen would have seen it, because she does understand the role of ritual and the importance of it.
There was unfamiliar ritual for white Australians to learn too.
Well, I did have to practice curtsying.
Oh, the curtsy.
And that, I perfected that eventually after a lot of practice.
You actually curtsy by putting one knee behind the other and sinking down. You can sink further than that, and you can also be more obsequious. But that's for the Archbishop, not for the Queen.
The 1954 tour did a big selling job for Australia. I was 9, 10 at the time, and I don't remember being very conscious of Australia before the Queen's tour. Suddenly, I was, and the idea of going to Australia became a very attractive idea, and it was actually promoted, and you saw newsreels of whole shiploads of rather downtrodden British people going to recreate themselves in this wonderful world of sheep and cattle and Bondi Beach and space and sunshine and great big steaks that we could only dream of.
It was a land of egalitarian informality. Yet Australians were fascinated by this stitched-up, aristocratic young woman.
I am very glad that I have had this opportunity of meeting so many of the children in my first visit to Australia. For it is you who will guard the safety and guide the destiny of this country in the years to come.